"Grandma, Daddy is taking your money tonight." The whisper came at exactly 9:47 p.m., and it changed everything. "Grandma," 6-year-old Lily breathed into my ear, her small hand cupped around my earlobe like she'd seen in movies. "Daddy is taking your money tonight." I froze mid-sip, my tea going cold in my hand, and stared at the dark hallway where my son-in-law, Daniel, had disappeared 20 minutes earlier with my laptop bag. My name is Margaret Ellison. I'm 68 years old, a retired school teacher, and until that Tuesday night, I believed I knew my family better than I knew myself. I'd been living with my daughter Claire and her husband Daniel for 8 months, ever since my hip surgery made it hard to manage the stairs in my old house alone. It had seemed like a blessing at the time, my daughter's warm home, my granddaughter's laughter filling the halls, Daniel's easy smile and constant reassurances that I was no trouble at all, Margaret, really. I should have known better than to trust a smile that never reached the eyes. That night had started like any other. Claire was working a late shift at the hospital. She was a nurse, and a good one, the kind who came home smelling of antiseptic and exhaustion, but always found the energy to kiss Lily goodnight. Daniel had offered to put Lily to bed while I settled into the living room with my tea and my crossword puzzle. It was routine, comfortable, the kind of evening that made me grateful for whatever twist of fate had brought me into this house. Then Lily padded down the stairs in her unicorn pajamas, barefoot despite my scolding about cold floors, and climbed onto the couch beside me. She didn't say anything at first. She just looked at me with those enormous brown eyes, Claire's eyes, my late husband's eyes, passed down like a secret across generations, and then she leaned in close. "Grandma," she whispered, "Daddy is taking your money tonight." I laughed it off. Of course I did. What grandmother wouldn't? "Sweetheart, that's a funny thing to say. Did you have a dream?" But Lily shook her head, solemn as a judge. "I heard him on the phone. He said tonight when you're asleep, he's gonna take the laptop and the papers from your room. He said Grandma won't even notice till it's too late." The teacup trembled in my hand. I want to tell you I handled it with grace, with the calm wisdom you'd expect from a woman who spent 31 years managing classrooms full of 8-year-olds. But the truth is, my heart dropped into my stomach like a stone into a well, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. Because here is the thing about being 68 and widowed and dependent on your family. You learn to make yourself small. You learn not to ask too many questions. You learn to be grateful, endlessly grateful, for a roof and a bed and a family who lets you stay. And somewhere in that grateful smallness, I had stopped paying attention to the things that mattered. Things like the fact that Daniel had asked, 3 weeks ago, whether I still had my late husband Robert's life insurance payout sitting, just in some boring savings account doing nothing. Things like the fact that he'd offered so generously, so casually, to help me set up online banking on my laptop, and I'd handed it over without a second thought because he was family, because he was Lily's father, because Claire loved him and I loved Claire, and love is supposed to mean trust. Things like the small, cold moments I'd brushed aside. Daniel's business, the craft brewery he'd poured 3 years and God knows how much money into, quietly struggling. The way he'd stopped meeting my eyes at dinner when the subject of money came up. The way Claire had looked thinner lately, more tired, more brittle around the edges, like a woman carrying something heavier than double shifts. I looked down at my granddaughter, this tiny 6-year-old oracle in unicorn pajamas, and I made a decision. "Lily," I said quietly, "I need you to tell me exactly what you heard. Can you do that for Grandma?" She nodded, very serious, very proud to be trusted with something important. Daddy was in the garage. He was talking on the phone and he said, "Don't worry, she keeps everything on that old laptop. She won't even know it's gone until the transfer clears." And then he said, "Tonight, after everyone's asleep, I'll get the passwords off her desk." My blood ran cold. My passwords. I kept them written on a small notepad in my nightstand drawer. Foolish, I know, But my memory wasn't what it used to be, and I never imagined I'd need to hide them from my own family. And then, Lily continued, warming to her story now, he said something about a man named Victor. He said Victor was gonna be mad if he didn't have the money by Friday. Victor? I didn't know any Victor. But the way Lily said the name, with the particular gravity a child gives to words she doesn't fully understand but knows are important, told me this Victor was not someone you wanted to disappoint. I set down my teacup. My hands had stopped shaking. Something colder and more useful had taken over, the same steadiness that had once let me handle a classroom full of chaos, the same steadiness that had gotten me through Robert's funeral without breaking down in front of our daughter. Lily, my love, I need you to go back to bed and pretend this conversation never happened. Can you keep a secret just for tonight? A good secret to help Grandma. She nodded eagerly, thrilled to be a co-conspirator, like a spy. Exactly like a spy, I said and kissed her forehead. Now go on, and Lily, thank you. You did the right thing telling me. She scampered back up the stairs, unicorn pajamas flashing in the dim hallway light, and I sat alone in the living room with my mind racing. Here's what I knew once I forced myself to think clearly. Daniel had access to my laptop. My laptop had my banking information saved in the browser because he'd helped me set it up. My laptop also had scanned copies of Robert's life insurance documents, my will, and the deed to the house I still owned outright. The one Claire and Daniel had been not so subtly suggesting I sell. Just to simplify things, Mom, now that you're settled here with us. I had nearly $300,000 sitting in that account. It was supposed to be my safety net, my dignity, the thing that meant I'd never be a true burden on my daughter. It was also, apparently, the thing Daniel intended to steal before Friday to pay off a man named Victor. I thought about waking Claire the moment she got home from her shift. I thought about calling the police right then and there. But something held me back. A teacher's instinct, maybe. The kind that tells you not to punish the whole class for what one student did, not until you understand the full story. Because there was still Claire to consider. My daughter, exhausted and thin and carrying something heavy. What if she already knew? What if she was complicit? The thought made me physically ill, but I forced myself to consider it, because pretending away uncomfortable possibilities is how people get hurt. I decided to wait, to watch, to gather proof before I moved. At 10:15, I heard Daniel's footsteps on the stairs, soft and deliberate, the walk of a man trying not to be heard. I had already retreated to my bedroom and turned off the light, propping the door open just a crack, lying in bed with my heart hammering against my ribs like a bird against a window. Through the crack in the door, I watched his shadow pause outside my room. I watched the door handle turn, slow and careful. I lay still, breathing the shallow, even breaths of pretend sleep, my eyes nearly closed but not quite. Daniel slipped into my room like a burglar in his own home. He went straight to the nightstand, opened the drawer with the practiced quiet of someone who'd done this kind of thing before, or at least rehearsed it in his mind many times. He found my notepad of passwords. He photographed it with his phone, the small flash illuminating his face for half a second, long enough for me to see his expression. It wasn't malice exactly. It was something worse. It was desperation wearing the mask of a man who'd convinced himself this wasn't really stealing, not really, because he'd pay it back, because it was technically his wife's inheritance too, because Victor's people didn't make idle threats, and what was Daniel supposed to do? Let something happen to his family. He took my laptop from the desk, and then he did something that broke my heart more than the theft itself. He paused at the foot of my bed, looked at me, sleeping as far as he knew, an old woman who trusted him completely, and he whispered, so quietly I almost missed it, "I'm sorry, Margaret. I'll fix this. I promise." Then he left. I lay awake until 2 a.m., listening to him move around downstairs, hearing the soft click of laptop keys, the murmur of a phone call I couldn't make out. When Claire finally came home at 1:40, exhausted from her shift, I heard them talk in low voices in the kitchen, not fighting, just talking, the tired shorthand of two people who'd had the same conversation too many times. I didn't confront anyone that night. I needed a plan, not a scene. The next morning, I called my nephew, Marcus, a corporate attorney who'd always had a soft spot for his Aunt Margaret and, more usefully, a talent for untangling exactly this kind of mess. I told him everything: the whisper, the theft, the name Victor, the desperation in Daniel's voice. "Aunt Margaret," Marcus said, "this sounds like it could be more than just family drama. If this Victor is who I think he might be based on that name and the urgency, we're talking gambling debts, maybe worse. You need to freeze those accounts today, and we need documentation." By that afternoon, my accounts were frozen and flagged. By evening, Marcus had helped me set up new passwords, new security questions, a new email, all channels Daniel couldn't access. And by the following morning, I'd learned something that made my blood run colder than anything Lily had whispered to me 2 nights before. Daniel hadn't just been planning to steal from me. He'd already tried once before, 3 months earlier, taking a smaller amount, $8,000, from an old certificate of deposit I'd forgotten I still had open. He'd covered his tracks well, transferring the funds through 2 accounts before it disappeared into what Marcus's investigator later confirmed was a debt payment to an underground sports betting operation that Victor, real name Victor Kowalczyk, ran out of the back room of a bar 3 towns over. $8,000, and now he'd been planning to take $300,000 more. I sat with that knowledge for a long time, turning it over like a stone in my palm. Anger came first, hot and righteous. Then grief for the family I thought I had, for the trust I'd given so freely. And then underneath it all, something more complicated: worry. Genuine worry for Daniel, for what desperation does to a person, and most of all for Claire and Lily, who loved him and would be devastated no matter how this ended. I called a family meeting for that Saturday evening. Claire thought it was strange. I never called family meetings, but she agreed, probably assuming I wanted to discuss moving back to my own house or some minor complaint about living arrangements. Daniel looked nervous the moment I asked everyone to sit at the kitchen table. Guilty men always do, even when they think they've covered their tracks. I'd asked Marcus to be present too, via video call, laptop propped on the counter, because I wanted a witness, and because I wanted Daniel to understand this was no longer just a family matter. I didn't raise my voice. I've found, in 31 years of teaching, that the quietest voice in the room commands the most attention. "Daniel," I said, "3 nights ago, you came into my room while you believed I was asleep. You photographed my passwords. You took my laptop. And you did the same thing 3 months ago with my certificate of deposit, $8,000, which I now know went to a man named Victor Kowalczyk to pay off a gambling debt." The color drained from Daniel's face so completely I genuinely feared he might faint. Claire's mouth fell open, and I watched, heart aching, as the realization crossed her features. Not that Daniel had a gambling problem, but that he'd been hiding its scale from her too. "Margaret, Daniel started. "I'm not finished," I said gently but firmly, the way I used to quiet a classroom of squirming children. "I want you to understand something, Daniel. I'm not calling the police. Not tonight. Because I love my daughter and I love my granddaughter, and I have to believe that the man who married my daughter isn't a lost cause. But I need the truth, all of it, right now in front of your wife before this goes any further." What followed was 2 hours of the hardest conversation I'd witnessed in years. Daniel's business had been failing for over a year, not months, a full year, hidden behind a smile and rehearsed reassurances at every family dinner. He'd started small, a few $100s on sports betting apps to relieve stress, and it had spiraled the way these things do, debt compounding on debt, until he owed Victor Kowalczyk nearly $40,000, and Victor's patience, and his associates' patience, had run out. He hadn't told Claire because he was ashamed. He hadn't told me because he'd convinced himself it wasn't really stealing if he planned to pay it back once the brewery turned around. He cried, at one point, in a way I'd never seen a grown man cry, and Claire cried too, and Lily, who I'd thought was asleep upstairs, appeared in the doorway in her unicorn pajamas. Having heard raised emotions even through quiet voices, and ran straight into her father's arms. I watched Daniel hold his daughter and sob into her hair, and something in me softened even through the anger, because I understood in that moment that desperation and love can live in the same broken heart. We didn't call the police that night. Instead, over the following weeks, we built something more useful, a plan. Marcus connected Daniel with a gambling addiction counselor and, separately, a financial attorney who specialized in negotiating down debts with exactly the kind of operation Victor ran, carefully, legally, with the threat of law enforcement attention hanging just visible enough to encourage a settlement. The brewery was sold at a loss, but a loss that cleared the debt and closed the door on Victor Kowalczyk for good. Daniel started attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings twice a week, and Claire, to her enormous credit, insisted on joining a support group for families of addicts, because she refused to pretend this was something she could fix alone or something that had nothing to do with her. As for me, I moved back into my own house within 2 months, not out of anger, but because I needed distance to heal, and because, quietly, without making it a condition, I let Daniel know that trust, once broken, has to be rebuilt one honest brick at a time, and that process works better with a little space. I still see Lily every weekend. She still whispers secrets in my ear, though these days they're happier ones about her favorite dinosaur, or a boy in her class named Tobias who she's decided she doesn't like, or the loose tooth she's convinced is going to fall out any day now. Sometimes, when she climbs into my lap and gets that solemn, serious look on her face, my heart still skips a beat, bracing for another whisper that will upend my world. But mostly now, it's just Lily being Lily, sweet and funny, and utterly unaware that 6 months ago, her innocent honesty saved her grandmother's life savings and, in a strange, roundabout way, saved her father too. I think about that night often, the tea going cold in my hand, the whisper in the dark, the decision I made to watch and wait rather than react in fury. I think about how close I came to losing everything I'd worked for across a lifetime, and how the truth came to me not through suspicion or careful detective work, but through the unguarded honesty of a 6-year-old who simply repeated what she'd overheard, because she trusted her grandmother enough to tell her the truth. Children see more than we think. They hear more than we realize. And sometimes the people we trust most completely are capable of the deepest betrayals. But so, too, are they capable of the deepest redemption, if given honesty, consequence, and the chance to make it right. Daniel is 2 years sober from gambling now. The brewery is gone, but he works as a shift manager at a restaurant downtown, steady and humble in a way he never was before. And every payday, without fail, he sets aside a small amount into a savings account with my name on it. Not because I need it, not really, but because he needs to keep proving to himself as much as to me that he's a different man than the one who slipped into my room that night. Claire and I are closer now than we've been in years. Grief and crisis have a way of stripping families down to what's real, and what remained after everything was love, imperfect, complicated, and fiercely determined. And Lily still thinks of herself as a spy, my little secret keeper, the girl who saved Grandma's money with nothing but a whisper in the dark. I've never told her the full weight of what she did that night. I don't think she needs to carry that. But every time she curls up beside me with her serious eyes and her small, warm hand reaching for mine, I think about how the truth found its way to me through the mouth of a child, and I am endlessly, quietly grateful. Some nights, family isn't broken by lies. Sometimes, it's saved by the truth, even when that truth comes as a whisper at 9:47 on an ordinary Tuesday night, from someone small enough to still believe that telling Grandma was simply the right thing to do.